Okay, today our topic is software logging. So we have shown a small example of a Java program including logging statements and how logging looks like, right? So what are the topics we cover today? The first we will cover some basics about logging. Then we'll discuss how modern logging looks like. Then we will do a log analysis exercise. So log analysis exercise is basically about how to analyze the log messages generated during the runtime. Okay, these are some references. Okay, and the first logging basics. So why we need logging, right? And why logging is related to software quality. So we insert the logging statements into the code, right? We have seen the examples. So this logging statements would generate log messages during runtime. So this log messages are very useful for us to debug our program, right? So we know the runtime information from a program, so we can use such information to debug our program. And we can use this information to do anomaly detection. For example, we have a log message which introduces an error, which shows an error. So we see there might be something wrong, right? Anomaly detection, system comprehension. Sometimes we don't need to look at the code. We just look at the log messages. If the log messages are sufficient enough, we can understand what happens. The log message can be considered as a storytelling tool, okay? Auditing. So there's a requirement for software companies to preserve their logs for a long time, for several years. Why? Because a third-party auditing agencies may check their logs and to check what happens in the program. This is about auditing. Okay, so because logs are very useful and it's related to software quality, right? And also it may be the only way to diagnose some failures. When we want to debug a program, so there are usually two approaches, right? The one approach is we use a debugger, right? When you're using IDE, you can launch a debugger. You can go one line by one and step into a function, step into a line, right? In this way, you can watch the values of the variables. Another way is you print some information out, like use a print statements or logging statements to print the information, to print runtime information to get an idea of what happened, right? But the print statements or logging messages might be the only way sometimes, because you cannot install a debugger like in a distributed environment, in production environment, okay? So there's a famous paragraph about whether to use logging or debugger. So if you are a programmer or a developer, so you usually may have the question about whether I should use logging or print statements or use a debugger, right? So which one is more effective? So this authors of this book, a very famous book, The Practice of Programming, they talk about the advantage of use logging or print statements over using a debugger. So they said, clicking over statements take longer than scanning the output of judiciously placed displays. It's more efficient to use a print or logging statements than using a debugger. This is their basic idea, okay? And what is logging? So we already have seen it, right? We have looked at some code. So we will repeat this exercise like after this section, okay? There are other tutorials you may want to follow, so we wouldn't cover them in this lecture, but you can check the links, okay? Back to our code, right? So what we have seen first we have seen the Maven configuration, right? Maven setup in this POM file. So we have two dependencies. The first dependency is a log4j API, right? Which defines the API, the logging statements API we used in the program, okay? And log4j core. So this define the logic behind this API, right? So they are both from the log4j library. specific log4j2 library. Okay, then we have I've seen this log4j configuration, right? So we have a configuration element within it. We have appenders, loggers, right? Within appenders, we have different files or console. Within loggers, we define different loggers and their level. Okay. And this is how we invoke logging and how we write logging statements. We use logger. First, we get a logger, then we call the method of logger. Okay. So this is how we use it. Then, so what is architecture of the logging framework? Let's look at this figure. So this is the UML diagram of the log4j class. Okay, the log4j classes. So so how it works. So first have a look at the overall architecture of the log4j classes. Okay, so look at their associations. So many components we have already seen, right? So how it works. So first, remember, we will request a logger from the log manager. Remember, right? We request a logger. So then log manager will locate the appropriate logger context and then obtain a logger from the context. So when we create a logger, it is also associated with a logger config. Logger config, you can consider it as one element in the log4j.xml configuration file, right? If you look at this here, we have loggers. So each logger here is actually a logger configure, right? To configure a log level. So logger configure objects are created from the logger declarations in the configuration. Okay, and each logger configure is associated with the appenders actually delivered log events. We see here, each logger is associated with appenders, right? Then we would output the content of these loggers into this appenders, and we define this appenders here. So this is basically the general architecture of the log4j classes. I may forgot to mention what is log4j. Log4j is a library for logging, right? It's a Java library for logging. Then we'll go to the details. First, logger and logger config, right? For each logger is associated with a logger config, right? So each logger we defined in our Java class is associated with a logger configure in a configuration XML file. Okay. So using the configuration, using logger config, so we can disable certain logging statements while enabling others. So this, remember, so each log configure will be associated with a log level, right? And these log levels include trace, debug, info, warn, error, and fatal. And they are ordered from lower level, the lowest level to the highest level. Okay. So then we can determine what is the configured log level for this logger config. Then we can output the logging segments with this log level or higher log level. Okay. And we have a hierarchy of loggers. So what is a hierarchy? So we use a dot structure like root dot parent dot child. If a logger has a name root dot parent dot child, so which means this logger is a lower in a hierarchy. In a hierarchy, is the child of root dot parent. It is also a child of the root. Okay. So this also we show how to get a root logger and how to get other loggers. So usually we give a name here, like we give a name analytics, which means we want to get the logger named analytics. And here, if we don't specify a name, they will get the root logger. Okay. And this one here, it shows when we configure a log level to a logger, what happens? So which statements would be enabled, and which message we can see in the output. Okay, so here each each column shows the configured log level in the logger config file. Okay, and each row shows the level of the logging statements. Okay, if we configure a log level, then other logging statements with this log level or with a log level that's higher than the configured log level will be output. For example, if we configure the log level as info, as in our example, coding example, right? If we configure the log level as info, then all the logging statements with the info level or higher levels, such as warm, error, and FIDO will be output. Okay. If we configure the log level as error, then only the logging statements with the level error and FIDO will be output. Okay. So this is basically how we control which message we want to output. Okay. So if the log level is defined for a logger, so we just use the defined log level. Otherwise, we use a parent level. Okay. So here we use some examples to illustrate how how the log level works in the hierarchy. Okay. So here we have 4 loggers: a root, x.y, x.y.z, right? We have 4 loggers. And we only define the logger config for a root. Right? In this case, all the children's, like lower in the hierarchy, like x.y, x.y.z. Remember, everything is the children of the root logger, okay? So they would have the config of their parents higher in the hierarchy. Here we use the config of root, right? And the root is configured with a debug level. So all the logger will also be configured in the debug level. Okay. So any questions here? In this example, we have more configurations. So we configure the a root logger and also the X logger, right? We configure 2 loggers. So here, we don't configure the loggers x.y and x.y.z, right? In this case, so the loggers x.y and x.y.z would reuse the config from their parent, the closest parent, which is x. Okay, so for root logger, we configure the debug level. For X logger, we configure the error level. So X and x.y and x.y.z would inherit the error log level. Okay. So in this example, all the loggers configure their own level. So they just use their own level. Okay. And in this example, so root and X are configured, and they are configured with level. X and y and x.y.z, they are configured, but they are not configured with any level. The level field is empty. In this case, they would reuse the log level of their closest parent. They would use the log level of error. Okay. Because we use the names, the dotted names to represent the logger names. So we need to make sure that the names must match exactly. Okay. The names are the only criteria to match 2 loggers to determine whether they are within the same hierarchy. Okay. So we talk about logger and logger config. The next thing we want to talk about is appender. So appenders is basically considered as a file or a standard output, like console. Right? Appenders allow Log4j to print logs to multiple destinations. Like we can have a console, we can have a file, we can have another file, right? So those are defining appenders. Appenders can also be databases, can be syslog. Syslog is a centralized location for log messages. Okay. So each output destination is called an appender. Appenders are also inherited additively from the logger config hierarchy. So which means, so we'll give concrete examples later, but here, which means the log requests are forwarded down the hierarchy, right? So if a root logger is output to one appender, then its children will also be output to the same appender. Okay, that causes like additivity. So we will give more details later. If we want to stop this forwarding, we can set the additivity equals to false in the configuration. Okay. So what is appender additivity? It means the output of a logging segments of logger L will go to all the appenders in the logger config associated with L and the ancestors of that logger config. Okay. So concrete examples is maybe more clear. Like here we have 4 loggers, root x, x.y, x.y.z, right? For root, we specify appenders A1. We don't have additivity flag because it's root logger, right? And so active appenders will be A1, right? And for X, so X, we specify 2 appenders, AX1, AX2, right? And the additivity flag is true, which means we enable the forwarding from the ancestors. Okay, so the active appenders would be AX1, AX2, right? And for logger X.Y, and we don't specify any appenders, but they will just inherit appenders from its ancestors, A1, AX1, AX2, right? For XY.Z, we define new appender, and they also will inherit all the appenders of its ancestors. So here, all the cases we enable the additivity flag. Okay. So what about if we don't enable it, right? So here in this case, still root and X, it's the same, right? We enable the additivity flag for the logger X, but for security, we disable it. We disable the additivity. So here, there's a new appender, but it will not inherit the appenders from the ancestors. So the active appender is only S1, okay? And there's another logger, and with a new appender, and the additivity flag is true, so it will just inherit the logger from security, not from other ancestors, because the additivity flag for security is false. Okay. So any questions here? Okay, there's some important information that you want to remember. So the level that will be used is a logger that was created. So which means the level of the logger that control the output of the logging statements. So it's actually is the one that is closest, the logger that is created. Okay. For example, to here. So when we define this logger, right? Logger, we get a logger from the logger manager with the name analytics.console. So here, so the logger name is analytics.console, right? So the level we use here is the level of analytics.console, this logger, right? If we define the level for analytics.console as info, then we use info level here. Otherwise, we go to a parent. If the logger analytics.console is not defined, we go to a parent. So yeah, we will see later on with the exercise, we will see what does it mean. Okay. Layout. Layout defines the format of the log message we want to output. Each appender uses a layout to format a log event into a form, into a customized form. This form is customizable, so you can determine the form that meets the needs of whatever will be consuming the log event. For example, if you just want to look at the log files, you can just use the way we just presented the timestamp, right? Log message, and if you want to output to a database, you may use another format. Okay, so there are different formats supported, including CSV, HTML, JSON, text, Python, syslog. We will see some examples later. Okay, and also you can output to data stores, databases like Mongo, Cassandra, right? And also you can output them to a dedicated log analytics tools such as Kibana and Elasticsearch. Okay. The simplest layout is the format and the Python layout. Python layout. Okay. Ideally, we should put our logs to a formatted data store, but usually, unfortunately, many logs are formatted according to a text pattern. So like a text pattern like this, like this. So here, so we first output the date, then sometimes the time, and also followed by the level, the name of the logger, thread name, or the message itself, right? And then finally a new line. And we need, in this way, we need to use a regular expression to parse these logs. Okay. Okay, so we just introduced all the basic ideas, basic concepts of logging. And here we look at the back again, right? We have these components in the log4j classes. We have a logger, we have logger config, and each logger is associated with a logger config. And within each logger config, so it is associated with multiple appenders, and each appender is associated with a layout. Okay, and we get a logger from the logger context using logger manager. Logger manager will find appropriate logger context and obtain the logger. Okay, and so we have a named hierarchy, right? We use dotted names to represent the hierarchy. Okay. A quick discussion, like so why we use log and what to log, right? So you can think about so why we use log and what to log. If you have so here we have some points here. If you have anything to add, so you can, so tell me, you can raise your hand or you can post on Slack, so we can like discuss why log and what to log, like based on your own experience, what do you log, right? So here we have so why we log, right? So log is like inner voice of your application. If your application is just a black box, you don't print anything out. And sometimes you have an error, but you don't know, right? And also you can use logger, you can output some performance metrics. For example, you print the time at the beginning of a method, and you also print the time at the end of the method. Then you know how long does it take to execute this method, right? And you can log many other information. So this, for example, you have error, you have exception, you want to log some context information, right? So any other like thought, like based on your own experience, what do you log and why do you log? Okay, so you can think further later. So there are some additional resources, like there's a famous software engineering radio there are some episodes about logging, so you want to check it out, okay? And then we will do a small exercise. So in this exercise, we already, I already show some code, right? This code is available on GitHub. You can just, I think you may not click it. I will send this on room chat, okay? Or I'll send a Slack on both places. So I want you to do some small changes to the code, to the configuration files. First change is to log a variable value. So remember, in our example, we just follow some plain text, right? I want you to log a variable value. First, you want to define a variable, then you log the variable. I want to log an exception trace. Exception. You want to throw an exception, and you log the exception. And configure the log level of the loggers. I configure different levels, right, for different loggers, and specify dependers for each logger, and customizing the layout using a slightly different layout. And there are some references. So I'll give you some time. I want you to do the practice. At least what you want to do is run the program I gave you. I get a sense of how it works. Look at the code. Look at the configuration files. And if you can make these changes. Make these changes. Okay. So I will send the GitHub folder, actually a folder, and you can do this exercise. Okay. I'll give you, I think, the time now. It's so I'll see you after. And also I want to give a break. I'll see you after 20 minutes. I'll see you like at 2:55. Okay, 2:55. I'll see you later, and I'll send a link to room chat and also Slack. Okay.